Hello guys, welcome to the channel's first video. I will be uploading videos about forgotten teams and players that played a big role in the football and basketball worlds. So, if you enjoy these types of videos, leave a like and subscribe to make the channel grow. It helps me out a lot. Also, any comments and critics are welcomed. So, if you have anything to say about the video, feel free to do so. Today's story is about the late 1990s and early 2000s Valencia, a team that experienced in real time the best and the worst side of football. There's a psychological truth about greatness that you aren't ready to face. Being the second best is profoundly more painful than being the worst. You think that coming close to a dream is a sign of progress, a stepping stone on the inevitable path to victory, but it is a psychological trap that can paralyze a generation. I'm going to prove to you, through the lens of a forgotten football empire, that the silver medal isn't a reward. It is a slow-acting poison for the soul. Psychologists call this counterfactual thinking. It is the mental torture of the if only. If only that penalty was saved. If only the manager hadn't made that substitution. If only the lights of the stadium weren't so bright on that specific night. This isn't just about football tactics. It is about how your brain handles regret, how trauma rewires your ambition, and why the human ego is so fragile when placed under the absolute highest pressure known to sport. And from 1999 to 2001, Valencia became the ultimate tragic laboratory for this phenomenon. They did not just lose 2 consecutive Champions League finals. They systematically dismantled the historic hierarchy of European football, breaking the richest and most powerful clubs on the continent, only to psychologically sabotage themselves at the exact moment immortality was handed to them. Why does a team that has absolutely everything, the perfect tactical system, the lungs of a marathon runners, and a mastermind behind it all, suddenly freeze when the final hurdle appears? And more importantly, who are the men carrying this impossible psychological weight? To understand the answer, we will investigate 2 of the most fascinating, grueling, and heartbreaking seasons in the history of the Champions League and study the minds of the men who were forgotten with time. To understand the psychological armor of Valencia, you must first understand the trauma that left them exposed. In the mid-90s, Valencia was a club defined by the illusion of a rival. Under Luis Aragonés in 1995-96, they engaged in a thrilling title race, propelled by the 28 goals of their star forward, Predrag Mijatovic. However, their sluggish start cost them the title, making they finish second behind Atletico Madrid. However, since until the 1997-1998 season, only La Liga's champion participated in the Champions League. But the deepest psychological wound was inflicted before the campaign even ended. Mijatovic signed a pre-contract with Real Madrid. It was the ultimate betrayal, sending a subconscious message that Valencia was just a stepping stone for the aristocracy. This shattered the club's psyche, triggering a chaos response. In a desperate attempt to buy their way out of the pain the following year, they brought in massive egos like Romario back from Brazil and appointed Jorge Valdano. The result was a toxic locker room that plummeted to a mediocre 10th finish in the 1996-97 season. They were a broken entity, choosing familiar chaos over the terrifying discipline required for true greatness. The club needed a violent paradigm shift. After no points in the first 3 La Liga games, Valencia hired Claudio Ranieri for the place of Valdano. Ranieri did not bring beautiful games, but he brought a philosophy of uncompromising discipline. He immediately began purging the roster of its destructive egos, famously clashing with and exiling Romario, while bringing in battle-hardened veterans like Jocelyn Angloma and Amadeo Carboni, who understood the value of endurance. But his greatest achievement was probably transforming Mendieta, a solid right back, into one of the best central midfielders in La Liga. Despite another slow start to the season and finishing only 9th, the team had the best campaign of the second half, and there was hope that good things were ahead of them. And they were right. Ranieri taught Valencia how to suffer, and they had an amazing season. In the summer of 1998, they were champions of the UEFA Intertoto Cup, a tournament organized by UEFA that gave spots for the UEFA Cup, Europa League equivalent nowadays, which was not a big deal, but gave it their first title in almost 20 years. By the 1998-99 season, that architecture of suffering yielded undeniable results. The team embraced a lethal, counter-attacking identity, fueled by the explosive speed of Claudio Lopez, who terrorized high defensive lines and scored 21 league goals. Valencia finished fourth, qualifying for the UEFA Champions League for the first time since 1971, dragging themselves out of the shadows of mediocrity. To cement their rebirth, they went on to win the Copa del Rey, smashing Atletico Madrid in the final and destroying Real Madrid 6-0 in the semis. Ranieri had constructed a fearless army, as when he departed for Atletico Madrid at the end of that season, he left behind the perfect, disciplined canvas for Hector Cúper, the man who would push them to the absolute edge of human endurance. To understand the peak of Valencia in the 1999-2000 season, you must understand the mind of the architect who built the cage, Hector Cúper. Cúper arrived at the Mestalla in the summer of 1999 as a man already carrying his own psychological baggage. The Argentine manager was a man who viewed football not as an expression of art, but as an exercise in geometric discipline and physical endurance. He had taken a modest Mallorca team to the final of the UEFA Cup Winners' Cup, only to lose to Lazio, who back then already had a stacked lineup. That silver medal was a quiet foreshadowing of the curse that would define his career. Cúper did not care about the beautiful game. He cared about the space behind the ball. He implemented a narrow and suffocating 4-4-2 system. However, the start of the 1999-2000 season was a nightmare. Cúper pushed the players to their physical breaking point in triple-session training camps. The players' legs were heavy, and their minds were poisoned with doubt. After 5 games, even though they were able to pass the qualifying round of the Champions League with ease, they were dead last in La Liga with only 1 point. The Mestalla crowd whistled their own players. The Spanish media demanded Cúper to be fired immediately, labeling him a defensive bore who was ruining the team's natural style of play. However, Cúper did not change a single tactic. He waited for the physicality of his players to match the speed of his mind, and he relied on a core of characters whose backgrounds perfectly suited an insane mentality. After moving to midfield under Ranieri, Mendieta went from one of the best midfielders in La Liga to one of the best in the world under Cúper, as his unmatched stamina allowed him to dominate both boxes, being the team's highest goal scorer with 19 goals across all competitions and eventually winning the UEFA Best Midfielder on that year. Alongside him was the lightning rod, Claudio Piojo. Lopez was an Argentine striker who he possessed an explosive, terrifying pace that broke defensive lines. Lopez grew up in the grueling Argentine leagues, learning to use his speed as a weapon of survival. For Cúper's counterattacking system to work, he needed someone who could cover 50 yards of empty grass in seconds, and Lopez was that guy. Added to that, the team also counted on Santiago Canizares. Canizares was a walking contradiction, a former Real Madrid youth product who was deemed not good enough for the capital club. He carried a massive chip on his shoulder. He was flamboyant, worldwide famous for his bleach blonde hair, but beneath the eccentric exterior was a deeply emotional, hyper-focused competitor. After leaving Madrid in 1998 looking for more playing time, he instantly became one of the best players on the team, and despite his short height for a goalkeeper, he had incredible reflexes, and his strong personality was key to the success that Valencia ultimately achieved in his 10-year tenure with the team. On October 2nd, 1999, the system finally clicked. Valencia walked into the Santiago Bernabéu as sacrificial lambs and beat Real Madrid 3-2. After that win, the team spent the rest of the 1999-2000 La Liga season as the best team, where even though they started only getting one of 15 possible points in the first 5 matches, they were able to recover well including 6 wins and 1 draw in the last 7 league games, including a 2-1 comeback win against Real Zaragoza, in a match that they needed to win to secure a 3rd place and a Champions League spot for next season, something that seemed out of reach earlier that season. However, as they had no chance to secure the La Liga title, they turned the Champions League into their personal hunting ground. As a 4th-place La Liga finish in the previous season, some were considering Valencia as the 3rd force of their group, behind Bayern Munich, who were the current runner-ups of the competition after collapsing to Manchester United in the previous year, and behind PSV, who was coached by the legendary Bobby Robson and was led by a young Van Nistelrooy in the attack. But Valencia surprised everyone, finishing first in the group with 3 wins and 3 draws, guaranteeing 2 wins against Rangers and showing grit and defensive strength, allowing only 4 goals in the first group phase. In the second group phase, same story as the first group. Manchester United and Fiorentina were widely considered as favorites. United were the current champions, and Fiorentina had Rui Costa and Batistuta, the best striker of the world at that time. Valencia again showed their force at Mestalla, earning 7 out of their 10 points at home and finishing second with 3 wins, 1 draw, and 2 losses. In the quarterfinals, they faced Lazio. This was the same Lazio that had broken Cooper's heart a year prior. Don't get fooled by Lazio's team today, as back then, this was the most expensive squad in the world, backed by the billions of Sergio Cragnotti, featuring Juan Sebastián Verón, Pavel Nedved, Diego Simeone, and Alessandro Nesta. They were the underdogs once again. However, guided by the hat-trick of Gerard Lopez and the force of Mestalla, Valencia crushed Lazio 5-2 at the Mestalla. Lazio's defense looked helpless with the speed of Valencia's vertical transition, and in Rome, they just held a 1-0 loss to go through. In the semifinals, they faced Luis van Gaal's Barcelona. Everyone expected Rivaldo and Kluivert to advance to a romantic final, as Barcelona had defeated Chelsea after falling down 3-1 in the first leg of the quarterfinals, and were the best attack of the competition so far. But Valencia did not want possession. They wanted the space behind the possession. As Figo was suspended for this match, Valencia made Barcelona pay in the Mestalla again, as they demolished Barcelona 4-1 in the first leg, with Mendieta orchestrating the midfield with surgical precision, while Piojo Lopez tormented the defense and scored 2 more goals. After guaranteeing their ticket to the final, losing 2-1 in the Camp Nou, Valencia had already shocked the continent. They had reached the Champions League final. Paris, the Stade de France, May 24, 2000. When you reach the final, your status fundamentally changes in your own mind. You are no longer the underdog with nothing to lose. You are suddenly the equal, carrying the weight of a trophy you can physically see on the sideline. Your brain handles these 2 states very differently. Against Real Madrid in Paris, Valencia froze. The lights of the Stade de France were too bright. The weight of history was too heavy. Real Madrid, who had endured a disappointing domestic season, finishing 5th in La Liga, arrived with their mythical European DNA. They knew they belonged there. It was their birthright. Valencia, on the other hand, looked like tourists. They abandoned the aggressive, suffocating pressure that got them there and retreated into their own half. Morieni scored. McManaman scored. Raul scored. They lost 3-0. As McManaman himself said, everything clicked on that night. It wasn't just a tactical defeat, it was a total mental surrender. The world saw a blowout. The players saw a ghost that would follow them into their nightmares. Cooper stood on the touchline, his face carved from stone, realizing he was second place again. Mendieta looked at the grass, his infinite engine finally out of gas. Valencia didn't lose to Real Madrid's tactics. They lost to the version of themselves that didn't truly believe they belonged on the podium. Most stories end here. The underdog team falls apart. The players are sold to the giants, and the dream fades into a footnote of history. And indeed, the fire sale began that summer. Claudio Lopez, the spearhead of the attack, the man who made the system lethal, was sold to Lazio for a massive fee. Gerard Lopez, the young intellect of the midfield, left for Barcelona. Javier Fariñas went to Inter Milan. The spine of the Orange Hurricane was ripped out. The fans mourned. The media wrote the obituaries. However, Cooper did not panic. He realized that the 1999 to 2000 team relied too much on pure speed, youth, and adrenaline. However, adrenaline is a finite resource as it burns out in the finals. To survive the trauma of Paris, he needed armor. He needed psychological monsters. He replaced speed with brute force and cold intellect. He brought in the 6'5" Norwegian striker John Carew to act as a physical battering ram. He signed Ruben Baraja from Atletico Madrid to dominate the midfield alongside Mendieta. And most importantly, he brought in Roberto El Raton Ayala. Standing at just 5'9", Ayala was severely undersized for a center back. By all conventional logic, he should have been bullied by the giant strikers of Europe. But Ayala compensated for his lack of height with a vertical leap that defied gravity and a terrifying mental intensity. From a secondary option in Milan to a key piece in Cooper's squad, as he and Pellegrino formed one of the best center-back duos in the club history. The 2000 to 2001 season was not a football campaign. It was a crusade of grim determination. They were no longer the fun, explosive underdog that the neutrals loved. They were ruthless, playing for one singular purpose: to return to the Champions League final and kill the ghost of Paris. They did not care about entertaining. They cared about surviving. In La Liga, we had a slightly different story from previous years, as Valencia started the season hot, as they even led the league from game day 6-12. However, the team faded a little bit throughout the end and finished in 5th, just shy from Champions League qualification. However, they showed that they still were that team with strong defense, as they conceded only 34 goals all season in La Liga, the best defense in the league. But their entire psychological bandwidth was focused on Europe. After an easy classification in the qualifying, they were now the favorites in the first group phase, as they were now a Pot 1 team due to their incredible run last year. And they played accordingly, getting 13 of 18 points against Lyon, Olympiacos, and Heerenveen to get the first seed. For the second group phase, they arguably got a lucky draw, getting Panathinaikos and Sturm Graz in their group, who were teams from pots 3 and 4, respectively, and were expected to fall in the first group phase. In this way, Valencia and United both got 12 out of the 18 possible points, where Valencia ended up as first due to goal differential. At the Champions League quarterfinals, they faced Arsenal. Arsene Wenger was building his Invincibles, featuring Thierry Henry, Patrick Vieira, Robert Pires, Troy Adams, Ashley Cole, and other giants in the game. However, even though they still have a terrible European reputation, back then it was worse, as they were eliminated in the group phase in the previous 2 Champions Leagues. After losing the first leg 2-1 at Highbury, Valencia returned to Mestalla and suffocated Arsenal, winning 1-0 through a towering Carew header, advancing on away goals. On semi-finals, they faced Leeds United. Leeds was the new darling of Europe, a young, vibrant, attacking team managed by David O'Leary, who was trying to avenge Arsenal, a club which he is an immense idol, and that he spent 18 out of his 20 professional years as a footballer. However, they didn't stand a chance. After a tense 0-0 draw in England, Valencia systematically dismantled Leeds 3-0 at the Mestalla. They were back. 2 consecutive finals, a feat almost new for Spanish teams, as up to that point, it was only achieved by Real Madrid, and it was not done in the last 40 years. The final was set in Milan, the legendary San Siro Stadium, May 23, 2001. The opponent was Bayern Munich, a German institution defined by its own iron will, desperate to erase their own trauma from losing the 1999 final to Manchester United. This was the peak of Valencia's psychological test. This time, they swore they would not freeze. And they didn't. Within 3 minutes of the opening whistle, Valencia won a penalty. Gaizka Mendieta, the Stoa captain, stepped up and scored. 1-0. They were leading the Champions League final. They were executing Kuper's plan flawlessly. However, after a few minutes, Stefan Effenberg was fouled by Onloma in the area. However, Canizares saved it. For nearly an hour, they were the champions of Europe. The defense, marshaled by Ayala, repelled wave after wave of Bayern attacks. Canizares commanded his box like a general. But the human brain grows a trauma memory. When you have suffered a devastating loss, the closer you get to redemption, the louder the voice of fear becomes. As the clock ticked past the 50th minute, the fear of losing grew larger than the desire to win. You begin to protect what you have instead of fighting for more. You stop playing to score, and you start playing not to concede. Then, another penalty was awarded to Bayern. Stefan Effenberg stepped up and equalized. 1-1. The game dragged into extra time, and the fear of losing was clearer than ever from the side of Valencia. The team gave up of attacking, and even though there were no clear chances from either side, Bayern was closer to the goal. But it didn't matter, as it went to penalties. The ultimate psychological roulette, a test not of skill, but of pure nervous system regulation. Canizares was magnificent. He was playing through immense personal grief, having lost his mother just months prior to the final. He looked up to the sky, drawing on every ounce of emotional resilience he possessed. He saved 2 Bayern penalties, one in the shootout and the other in regulation. He was doing the impossible. But Oliver Kahn, the legendary German titan in the opposing goal, was a wall of pure intimidation. Of course, it is easy to say now, but after the 4th Valencia penalty, that if they would have the side only needing to make the 5th to win it all, everyone should know that they were not winning. Amedeo Carboni, the left back, went on to take it. He shot it right in the middle, and Kahn jumped to the front. The ball touched his hand, then touched the crossbar, then bounced close to the line, and went out. When this type of stuff happens, you know that luck is not on their side. And it came down to sudden death. The 7th round of kicks. Mauricio Pellegrino, the veteran Argentine defender, the rock of Kuper's system, stepped up to the spot. He struck the ball. Oliver Kahn saved it. The San Siro fell completely silent for the Spanish fans. The players collapsed. Kili Gonzalez fell to his knees, sobbing uncontrollably. Mendieta stared into the void. But the defining image of that night belongs to Canizares. The flamboyant goalkeeper dropped to the goal line and wept with devastation that transcends sport. Oliver Kahn, the victorious German captain, walked past his own celebrating teammates. He ignored the trophy. He walked straight to Canizares, knelt beside him, and tried to console a broken man. It was a sign of ultimate respect from the victor to the vanquished. Kahn knew that Canizares hadn't failed. He was just a victim of a psychological cruelty that football occasionally inflicts on the great. 364 days later, Valencia had climbed Mount Everest, and, just like in Paris, they ended up without oxygen, dying on the way up. The pain of Milan broke Hector Kuper. He left the club for Inter Milan shortly after, unable to shake the label of a loser of finals that would haunt his entire managerial career. Mendieta, the engine and soul of the city, was sold to Lazio for a then-record fee. His career after Valencia was tragic. He never found a system that understood him like Kuper's did, fading away in Italy and eventually finishing his career in Middlesbrough. The magic of the Orange Hurricane died on the grass of the San Siro. But the most incredible part is what happened after the trauma. You cannot heal in the same environment where you were broken. The club hired Rafael Benitez, who took the broken psychology of the locker room and performed a reset. He took the impenetrable defensive wall that Kuper built of Ayala, Pellegrino, and Canizares, and shifted their focus entirely away from the trauma of Europe. He convinced them to conquer Spain instead. And against all conceivable odds, this group of traumatized runners-up found a way to rise. Under Benitez, Valencia won La Liga in 2002. Then, in 2004, they achieved the ultimate vindication, winning La Liga again and finally claiming a European trophy by winning the UEFA Cup. But the soul of those victories was forged in the fires of 2000 and 2001. The La Liga titles were the payoff, but the Champions League finals were the psychological crucible. The men who played in those finals are remembered not just for the trophies they eventually won, but for the agonizing beauty of how they lost. They showed us the terror of the near miss. They proved that the ego you build to survive the pain will be tested to its absolute limit, and that sometimes being the second best in the world is the heaviest cross a human being can bear. And that is it, guys. If you came this far, all I can say is thank you for your attention. This video is not made to disrespect Valencia or any of its fans. It is just to show the history of a team that in the late 90s and early 2000s was one of the most dominant teams in Spain, and nowadays I see almost a no praise for their campaign and their players. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and I hope to see you in the next one.